When I try to confront death, of course, like anyone, I'm defeated. And I can approach death in different ways. So it can be, some erotic, sexy death, as it might be in some of those Japanese stories, or some really grim kind of death, as in the Bohemian stories. But it doesn't really matter because we're looking into a dead skull's eye sockets. And the dead skull is not looking back at us, or if it is, we're not understanding what that gaze means. It probably means nothing. So the only way to approach death is to project. These stories are movies that we're watching projected on a black wall.
All these stigmata of peacetime faded, just as the shell holes and bullet holes should have done a decade ago, and the story of the lovers began. Many men have been conquered by the way a Sarajevo girl parts her lips when she is blowing smoke rings, holding the cigarette beside her ear. Because Zoran had grown up with Zlata, he could hardly have said how or when he lost his freedom. But on a certain evening of green light, he found himself sitting beside her in the park, and while the birds sang, his hands went helplessly around her, just above the buttocks. He was bending her backward, his tongue in her mouth, and she was pushing him away, after which her arm somehow fell around his neck.
What is your biggest influence when it comes to the mythologies of death that are recurring through the book?
Well, I want the different sections to feel different. So with the Japanese sections, probably, I've been informed by no plays and traditional Japanese ghost stories in which a ghost is trapped in some kind of love attachment or jealousy or something like that, and he or she is kind of recapitulating what he's done or what she's done in life, and it can be sad and beautiful, but not necessarily gruesome. Whereas the Bohemia stories are more based on that culture in which the dead are sort of hateful and hostile when they come back. Well, if you have to die, your death might as well be sexual. At least that's my plan. And sex can be very death-like, and I don't know, but I'm hoping that death can be very sex-like. We will see.
Any specific plans, or?
I just have to find the right sex partners. But I will put it off for a while.
Perceiving that the hollows beneath his eyes were the same color as the stubble on his chin, she longed to kiss him. As she began to pull his head against hers, a shell smashed loudly down, neither near nor far. She began to scream. Her mother rushed upstairs. An empty jar fell from her hand and shattered. Zoran stayed long into the green evening light, holding Zlata's hand. But before dark he had to go home because his family needed water. When he said goodbye, the girl could not stop sobbing. That half-cruel look of hers, which he used to find so erotic, had now entirely gone. She was ill.
I think that to see death is to be damaged, and to see violent death is to be damaged further. And so, compared to a soldier, I'm very, very lucky. One of the reasons that witnessing violent death is so awful is because you see people's agency taken away from them, and then you tend to feel more powerless yourself. But if you're a journalist and you're going in and out of war zones, then you're insulated to some extent, and you can always think, well, I signed up for this. So when my two friends were killed in Bosnia, Of course, I felt very, very upset. And at the same time, I didn't have to feel as upset probably as I would have if we'd all been from there and we were just friends in the neighborhood and they'd been killed and we had no choice in the matter. So I think reminding ourselves of our agency in life is a way to fight off some of the damage. You know, U.S. Marines or people in ex-Yugoslavia who were ethnically cleansed and so forth have a much greater burden than I do.
And you mentioned place at the beginning. You were born in L.A.
That's right.
Do you feel a connection to Los Angeles?
For a while I didn't. You know, I used to be very depressed. Coming on 5, getting to Grapevine and going over the hill and then seeing a sea of smog. And my heart would just kind of sink. Then when I was writing Imperial, and I was lucky enough to meet some people who could show me some parts of Art Deco LA, and I started going to the public library and looking at pictures of downtown and so forth, I got very, very excited. And then I started talking to people about where they think LA ends. And to an outsider, it's all this one huge place. But for you who live here, it's not that way at all. And they'll say, look, you know, you go a certain distance on Highway 10, and then suddenly people often have a different kind of car in their backyard and all this kind of stuff that outsiders are not dialed into. And I find so fascinating. And I would like to know more about it. I also think that where global warming is taking us and the drought and all this stuff means that LA is going to be very, very different in 20 years and incredibly different in 50 years. And so probably the water is going to become a really big deal. What does that mean? No one can really imagine it. And in a way, it's like these stories. You're just looking at death, and you think, okay, this is going to go away, but you can't actually imagine what's going to come, if anything's going to come. In the case of LA, there has to be something. In the case of death, there might be something, or there might be nothing. Nothing is not so bad. Not as bad as some of the scenarios in these stories. I would ask him if he feels that that he has done enough for people, whether he has any intention of getting off his butt and trying harder to make a difference in the world instead of just writing about it. And if someone asked me that, I would say, I'm trying, and it's so much harder to help people than to hurt people. I'm always amazed at how hard it is to help people. But yeah, I'll keep trying.